All right. This open meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, and the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. I hereby call to order the September 3rd meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee at 7 p.m. I am Narissa Wallen, Chair of the Triton Regional School Committee, and I would like to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Erin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Goldner?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Maureen?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Caitlin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Lees?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Linda?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Mayette?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. And I don't think Tina showed up. I do not see her in the list.
She's trying to get here. She's just not available yet. She'll be here in a couple minutes.
She told me she'd probably be a couple minutes late, so.
Yep.
She will join us when she joins us. And Kaylee?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. All right. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Triton Superintendent Brian Forget.
I'm here and I can hear you.
And I will make apologies for Assistant Superintendent Kim Croto. She had a conflict tonight and is unable to make it, so she's not going to be here tonight. We said if there are questions for her, we'd take notes and make sure that she got back to whoever needed information.
Yep.
School business official Kyle Warren. I know he's on here.
I am here and I can hear you.
There you are. Thank you. Special Ed Director David McGee.
I am here and I can hear you.
Thank you. High School Superintendent Patrick Kelly.
I think I just got promotion to superintendent.
Oh my
You can
gosh,
have it.
sorry.
You can have it. Let's trade.
High School Principal Patrick Kelly. It's been a long day.
Day? Yeah.
Sorry. And Athletic Director Tim Albert.
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you very much. For this meeting, the Triton School Committee is convening remotely via Zoom using the information posted on the district's website identifying how the public may join. If you are personally attending by video conference using your device's camera, please be aware that others may be able to see you. Committee members and administrators, please remember to mute your computer or phone when you are not speaking. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the district's website with the agenda posting unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All right. So welcome to the September 3rd meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee. I will keep my remarks short tonight, and the main thing I wanted to note is that we are going to need to change next week's meeting. We're going to change it from Wednesday the 9th, which is when it's been scheduled to Thursday the 10th. That was primarily because we have to have a 2 business day posting window where we have to have those posted ahead of the agenda posted ahead of any meeting. Because of the long holiday weekend this weekend, that would have meant that we would have had to post next week's agenda before this meeting if we were going to hold it on Wednesday. That would have been obviously extremely difficult because we wouldn't have been able to include anything that occurred at this meeting. It would have left us at a pretty significant disadvantage, I think, in planning that agenda appropriately for that meeting. So by moving it to Thursday, we won't have to have the agenda posting up until Tuesday. So that'll buy us some extra time to make sure that we can be reactive to what happens in this meeting and make sure that the agenda topics for next Thursday are appropriate. Members, I think you probably assume this as well, but we'll be canceling the workshop that was scheduled for September 12th. That's traditionally our professional development and school committee goals workshop, and we're meeting so much right now, and I cannot see us taking on additional work toward goals this year. Perhaps later once we get beyond the beginning of the school year, but definitely at this point, that's something that I think we're just going to stick with our I'd call them regular meetings, but they're not even regular meetings at this point, since we're well beyond our regular business meetings that we usually have. So those are the two updates in chairman's comments, and I'll move on to oral communications from the public. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Members of the public, the meeting host muted you as you entered the meeting. If you would like to address the committee, please indicate now that you would like to do so, either by raising your hand on your video call or using the raise hand option on the participant screen. The meeting host will unmute you so that you can address the committee. Please refer to the public comment policy language on the agenda when making your comments, and remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. When you have finished speaking, the meeting host will mute you again. And I'll just really quickly read the kind of bulk or meat of the public comment guide policy that's on the agenda. It says, members of the public may address the committee for up to 3 minutes, longer with permission of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes unless extended at the discretion of the chairperson. So, all that said, is there anyone who would like to speak in the public comment tonight? Caitlin? Hi.
You just have to unmute yourself, Caitlin. There you
Okay.
go.
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think I should be able to fit this in 3 minutes.
All right.
So a little bit over.
I've got my phone. I'll give you the signal if it's not quite there.
Okay. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about some concerns that I've had about fall sports happening this fall, as well as some other players that I've talked to. So I'm Caitlin Keeler. I'm going to be a senior next year, and I play field hockey. So I've been talking to players on both the girls soccer team and my team, and I've been talking to mostly seniors. And both those teams have a lot of modifications that drastically change the games that we've, been playing forever. And the seniors I've talked to on both teams, I think, are willing to take the risk of moving to the floating season if it means that we can have less modifications and have, a more normal senior season. And then another concern we had was implementing those modifications. If we have sports, they'll start 15 days from today. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on coaches, players, and administration right now. Coaches and administration are in a huge time crunch for implementing everything safely. And a delay would allow a few months before winter sports begin for them to really have time to, make a great plan to make sure everything's as safe as it can be. And students right now have to adjust to the new rules, especially soccer players, because their game is 100% different. And I think for a lot of us, so all soccer players and a lot of defensive field hockey players, contact is really second nature for us. And retraining our brains to not contact other players is going to take more than 15 days. So I think that moving this season would be probably the safest option in that regard. And remote learning right now is new and stressful for everybody. I know all the teachers and administration are back. My mom's a teacher, so I kind of know what's going on and with that, and we'll be going back in a couple of weeks. And I know I'm nervous about remote learning, so that's a lot of stress, I think, for a lot of people right now. And I think if we have the chance to adjust to how school's going to run and have a little bit of time, I think that would be probably best for a lot of people. And then my final concern is how transportation is going to work. A lot of people have working parents, or underclassmen don't have licenses, or even upperclassmen sometimes, and no car. And right now we can't carpool, obviously. So for me, my sister and I share a car, and she works in the fall. And usually I would stay after school before my practices and games, and I would just wait until it was my time to go out on the turf. And now she's working and I won't have a car. So it's all kind of messed up right now. And if we're hopefully hybrid by the time the floating season begins, that will take away a lot of those issues. So I think that's all I have. I hope that fit in the time I had, but
You ended up 7 seconds over, so that's perfect.
oh, good, yeah, yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
yeah,
you, Caitlin.
Yeah.
All right, anyone else that wants to speak during public comment, you can either raise your hand in your video call or use the raise hand option that you'll find in your participant screen. If you're not seeing the participant screen right up there, you'll find it by hovering over the bottom of the Zoom window, and it should give you an option to bring up that participant screen.
I'm not seeing
Anyone
any other
else?
literal or digital hands raised.
Yeah, I'm scrolling, but I'm not seeing any. Nope. Good.
No, we're good.
All right. Reports and deliberations. So we're starting with the reopening of schools, update and further discussion. And I don't know, Superintendent, are you introducing this or are we moving straight into the fall sports modifications?
Yeah, I was just going to give a quick update and then pass it over to Tim to talk about the modifications that Caitlin referenced and have him just kind of walk through them briefly. I don't want to go through in detail. You've had the chance to read them, but have an opportunity for Tim to just go over them at a high level and give you an opportunity to ask the questions. But just to give you an update of where we are, all staff returned on Monday, this past Monday. We've just completed our first week of PD, combination of both remote and in person. So far, so good. We're off to a great start, some great PD, great training, a lot of safety training, a lot of logistics, and already digging into what this is going to look like. So obviously next week and in the following 2 weeks, one thing I did let parents know was that we were able to agree with the Teachers Association an orientation for Monday and Tuesday, the 14th and 15th. So we were hoping to do that K through 12. At the middle school, high school campus, we agreed the best approach is, just given the logistics of that campus with close to 1,200 students on the campus, focusing on grade 7 and grade 9 that are new to that campus or new to the school. And then doing a drive-by and greet and materials pickup. So more information coming on that. I had alerted all families, and then I believe on Tuesday, certainly by Wednesday at the latest of next week, we'll get the information out from each school in regards to scheduling so that parents have that information. Athletics we'll talk about, and then the other thing I was going to give an update on is just in regards to the metrics, but we do have that on the agenda for tonight, so we can pass that along. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Tim, who was here with his suit, and now I don't see him. He is still here. There he's coming back.
I'm here.
There he is. He's reappearing. So I'll pass it over to Tim, and again, we're going to keep this brief in regards to the overview, and then give everyone a chance to ask some questions.
Great.
Tim.
Thank you, Brian. Just to recap, last week we were waiting on the MIA sport committees to come up with modifications. Those came in just 24 hours after we last met. So I will update on the different sport modifications. All the modifications allow student athletes to play the game with low risk and to play as safely as possible. So yes, there are some drastic changes to certain sports, but that's what the team of doctors, trainers, athletic directors, epidemiologists from the Department of Ed, EEA, and MIAA came up with in order to have schools participate in high school sports. I do caution, yes, there is a floating season. However, we don't know what that will look like in February. We do know what things look like now, and these modifications, give us minimal risk. We have, as a league, it's pretty certain that everyone is trying to make this happen. If that's the case, there wouldn't be any teams to play in the floating season. So it's quite a dilemma. The Middlesex League, just to our southwest, is also going with all sports. And those were the recommendations that we made. I will touch over some of the modifications as a league. Out of the abundance of caution, we as a league recommended that volleyball be moved to the floating season entirely as a league. Given that volleyball is an indoor sport, we felt that that would be best to delay at this time to the floating season. All other sports, we have been working tirelessly as athletic directors and as principals to go over general procedures. Some of the rule changes, pretty much in general, it's 24 pages, so I'll try to cut it down as best I can. But there's great emphasis on keeping the areas safe. Benches are going to be extended the whole length of the field so students can socially distance. The goal area, where usually you'd have a scorekeeper, that has been extended. The officials pretty much in all sports are doing a general overview before. The officials will not be within 6 feet of the students. Officials are now using electronic whistles to keep everything a little safer. It is a paperless sign-in system for officials to get paid, which is helpful. And at the conclusion of games, there would be no handshakes. It would be simple gestures of good sportsmanship, and then off to their respective transportation modes. In terms of the games, just for soccer, the timeout rule has been suspended. They've also, masks are required in all sports, and I will get in a little bit in each detail. But for soccer, masks are required at the start. Everyone wears it. If someone is within 10 feet of someone else and they need a mask break, they can, but the general default is that you wear your mask. In order to make it, soccer is a very strenuous sport. In order to make it manageable for the student athletes, instead of 2 halves, there'll be 4 quarters to break down the game into more segments. At those times, there won't be any huddles. There'll be socially distanced gatherings, and students can have a mask break and drink from their respective water bottles as a little break to help out the students. Equipment, everyone will be, during the game of soccer, no one will be touching the ball with their hands. So that eliminates plays like a throw-in on a sideline out of bounds. You will pass the ball in. It will be an indirect pass, so you won't be able to kick it in the air. Goalkeepers won't be punting the ball over half field, otherwise that's a penalty. Balls at the end of each quarter are disinfected by a site game administrator. There's rules on goalkeepers and their gloves and sanitation issues. No heading of soccer balls. Playing defense, you are not going to be touching anyone. It's a violation to place your hands on any opposing player. There's certainly no shoulder-to-shoulder contact, no slide tackling. And, you know, it will take some time, but there are 10 practice days after the season starts for students to get used to the rules before an actual contest happens. And everyone will be learning at the same pace. So, you know, it's certainly a different game, but, you know, it's the reality of the world we're living in now. If we want the game of soccer, this is the version that has been deemed safe by all of our governing bodies. And I still think it can be competitive. I still think everyone will enjoy it. All the benefits we've talked about, social emotional well-being, to end the school day are still there. So those are pretty much the soccer modifications. Field hockey is a little simpler. Instead of 11 players on the field, there'll be 7 players on the field. They'll have no penalty corners, which is an offensive strategy and creates a lot of offensive players in front of the goal area. Those will be replaced by free hits 25 yards out from the goal area. And there won't be any face-offs. It will just be alternating possessions, so students won't be coming close. Also in the game of soccer and field hockey, there won't be any type of ball boys or ball girls. We'll have additional equipment around the field to make it safer. If a student does need to go retrieve a ball on behalf of the team, they are able to do so with their feet, not with their hands. Also, in terms of pregame, the officials will not be inspecting sticks just to minimize any type of contact with the students. That will all be put on the coach as a coach's discretion, that everyone is maintained proper equipment. In terms of cross country, we'll just be having dual meets where you match up against one other team. Pods of students would be in groups of 5 or 10, and those students would stay the same throughout their practice season. The course will be a little wider at the start and the finish line. There'll be restrictions on who can be in that starting line. At the beginning of a race, everyone will have their masks on, and as soon as there's separation, then students put their masks away. And then as they approach the finish line, they do put their masks back on. No sharing of equipment in any sports. Course previews for cross country will be done virtually. Electronically, we'll show the visiting team how our course looks and what they can expect. There'll be designated warm-up areas. There'll be wider finish lines and starting lines. We'll be staggering starts to minimize how many students are starting in a race, so it's not all jammed together. And each school will be separated by 14 feet. There'll be different ways of finishing the race in terms of scoring that will be kept down in a safe area. And same thing at the end of a meet, students will, from a distance, congratulate each other and depart as soon as possible. And finally, golf. There'll be no use of the clubhouse, no handshakes or elbow bumps. All players must use their own equipment. All safety protocols supplied by the golf courses must be followed. Face coverings must be worn and socially distant at 6 feet. Once students are away from each other on the golf course, they are free to take off their mask when they're taking a shot, but the default is that you wear your mask. We'll also have staggered start times similar to cross country, and the scoring at the end, as far as scorekeeping, will be done primarily by the coach. So those were the guidelines. The MIA posted all the sport modifications right on their front page, MIA.net. There's a big COVID-19 page. I do want to stress, folks that were involved were the EEA, Department of Ed, MIAA, also got approved by the MIA Sports Medicine Committee, as well as 2 epidemiologists who work on both EE and DESE. And this happened over virtual meetings throughout the tail end of the summer. So I'm happy to take any questions.
I was just going to say, do you want questions now? All right. Questions from the committee? Anybody? Maureen?
Sorry. Okay. So I guess I wanted to start kind of asking almost the same question I asked last week. I know Patrick kind of answered my question, but we didn't have the modifications last week. And basically I asked about taking it sport by sport. And if you think a decision should be made for all our fall sports, or if you could take it, sport by sport. For example, I mean, cross country and golf have minimum modifications and could probably be played, pretty easily. I am concerned about all the modifications that were done to soccer and to field hockey. So I'm just wondering if you think that it should be one decision or sport by sport.
My opinion, as a league, we looked at volleyball and we made that decision in abundance of caution. I think the more modifications to a sport, I think that shows the care and safety that was put in place in thinking how these sports can run. Certainly, it's not what we're used to. But the unknown is, if it doesn't run now, it's probably not going to run. Every school in the league is planning on running all the other sports, so there wouldn't be anyone to play. With everything being local now in terms of schedules, schools aren't adding non-conference games and meets. So, taking it sport by sport, it was done on a league decision, and everyone, is trying to make it happen for all the sports except for volleyball in the fall. Certainly I think there are some modifications, but, it'll be good competition. I think this is a year where the goal isn't to win a league title or to win a state championship. There is no state championship this year. I think the goal is to get everyone outside, get everyone together, especially for our seniors, have them enjoy their teammates one last year, put on a Triton uniform, represent the school, and be able to use our beautiful facility. So that's my opinion on terms of breaking it down sport by sport.
Okay. So can I ask, I guess, a clarifying question? Because I've heard in the last day or so, and I'm not certain if this is true, that some schools in the Cal have already made their decision. Somebody was referring to Newburyport, but it was my understanding that Newburyport hasn't really 100% committed. They're meeting again next week, I believe, for their school committee to continue the discussions. So do you know if decisions have been made across the Cal?
Maureen, if you don't mind repeating, I apologize. I did tell Brian and Patrick I'm having a tad bit of internet problems. And
Oh, okay.
I told my twin boys, do not use Xbox under any circumstances.
I just kicked my son off too.
And I reminded my wife just now, can you go make sure they're not using some other device that we don't even know about? So I apologize. It kind of broke up. If you don't mind repeating the question. Yeah.
No problem. No problem. My question was basically if you know if other schools in the Cal have already made the decision. And I guess I just gave the example. Somebody said Newburyport had, and I've heard that they haven't. So I'm just curious if you know.
Okay. That was loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay.
Newburyport is starting hybrid, so they didn't necessarily need school committee approval. They did have a school committee meeting last night where they discussed athletics, and from everything I've heard, they're moving full forward with athletics.
Okay.
Also, Linfield had a similar type meeting. And Hamilton Wenham last night also gave the green light for sports as well. So those are the three that have had theirs. Others are going to be meeting next week. No one knows exactly how it will look, but the feeling was that, everyone was very optimistic that folks were going to get the approval they needed to make it happen.
Okay. So you mentioned Hamilton Wenham. We learned this afternoon that Hamilton Wenham has made the decision to switch from hybrid to remote because of an increase in cases in their community. So does that mean that will affect their sports decision? I don't know where the color code puts them on the governor's map, but it's my understanding that if a district is remote and they're color red, then they have to do the floating season.
The only thing I'll add as a caveat there is there's been further clarification about 1 week versus multiple weeks in the red, if you will.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's the data we've talked about this in previous weeks. It does not take a lot of cases to shift us from white to red or back to yellow. It could be 1, 2 cases back to yellow, back to green, back to white. So I think the key is that it's what I understood from the commissioner the other day is if you've definitively and squarely in red and week over week you're seeing increased cases and you've basically been told you need to be in a remote permanently until further notice, then yes, you cannot have an athletic season. But unlike, just like everything else, I should say, it's don't take 1 week's worth of data and then make decisions that are long lasting. So that was the advice, at least from DESE. So my guess is
Okay.
that Hamilton wouldn't change things overnight, but that they would then take it under advisement. They could, they absolutely could, but they don't automatically have to.
Okay. All right. All right.
Add to Maureen that I had already gotten in touch with their chair this afternoon to try and find out what their upcoming meeting schedule would be, because obviously this is a significant change for them. And I just said, if you can keep me in the loop, let me know what's going on. So I hopefully will have more information on that.
Okay. I have more questions. Is it okay if I continue? Okay.
Sorry, yeah, keep going.
Okay. The next questions I have relate to sort of financial impacts on the athletics budget. And I mean, a big one is transportation. I know, we talked about it last week, but, I just want to know, like, have we talked about how this is going to impact the budget for transporting the kids and making sure they have enough buses to maintain the distance that they're supposed to on the buses? And I know we also talked about parents driving, and I know, Narissa, you brought up last week, that it's a bigger discussion because it could be a liability. So I'm just curious if it's time to have that discussion about transportation.
I'm happy to chat. I know Tim and I and Patrick, and then I talked to Kyle. So I think, if we had adjusted, we originally talked about using the 6-foot distance on buses as well. And then we reverted back to the DESE recommendation. So we have 77 passenger buses that allows 25 students. And speaking with Tim, that roughly will fit a team. We do have the 2 white minibuses as well. So it might mean that if there was an overflow, we need to use the bus and an overflow with one of the minibuses. But there'd be savings in other areas where things aren't happening necessarily. Not everything might be running with transportation. So the money that was set aside for football and such, is that going to happen in February? So there's some float there, if you will. So I think, could there be increases, and feel free to jump in but my kind of walk away was there could be increases, but we're not talking about, doubling by any means the transportation budget or even 50% more. I think given the way we landed in using the DESE guidelines, it would largely allow us to, with minimal impact, provide the transportation as required.
Okay, well, because I mean, from my experience with high school soccer, when they go off to a game, they typically send the JV and the varsity together on the bus, and that is more than 25 students. And so I would think that would require an additional bus in a case like that.
Yep. So in those cases, there'd be probably fewer games, right? So if it was the same schedule, the same number of the same number of contests and all, it would be a wash, and it would be a lot more expensive. But given the fact that a lot of that's going to be pulled back in, that there would be, like I said, there would be absolutely some uptick. But, unlike the other areas we're talking about, where we're talking about $150,000 solution, that's not what we're talking about here.
And I share the same sentiment. I think it's important to look at this for the financial impact on transportation, looking at the season as a whole. Surely the per trip cost will increase, but where you have less matches, away games, things like that, that'll offset, and other factors as well.
Okay.
And I was going to say, unlike regular transportation, so we're going to be paying, like we did last year, we're going to pay that 78% of each bus cost to make sure we have the drivers intact. So that there'll be some savings there as we're not running all the runs right away. But with all, it's athletics falls under charter. So we only pay when they go. So there is no sunk cost where they've, kind of pre-baked a certain number of runs that we have to pay regardless. It's only the trips we take.
Okay. And just to sort of go back to the parent piece, Brian, I mean, is there a liability to have parents driving students? I just want to kind of clarify.
Huge, yes.
Okay. All right.
We don't like that, right? I mean, I think, we even said today, if it was a parent requested it and there was an extenuating circumstance, there was a concern about safety, and the parent was going to come to the school, pick the student up, drop the student off at the field, I think we could make that work. Students leaving campus, getting in cars and driving to the field, and that huge liability. I think that as a general rule, we wouldn't say, yes, parents can come get kids, but if it was a need, right? If it was a solution and there were parents similar to parents choosing remote and just have overall concerns, they're comfortable with their child playing golf because it's outdoors, it's very different than being inside, but they're not comfortable having them on the bus, then we would absolutely work with them on that. But it would have to be parents coming, picking up, dropping off, not, as I said, not kids getting in cars.
Okay. And then the next sort of financial related question I have, I don't know if it's Brian, would be you, or for Tim, or both, but it's in regards to the athletic fees, with all the modifications, are the athletic fees modified? Are they going to be the same, the $350 for high school sports, or has anybody talked about that?
So I would say the fees, that's we recommend to the committee, you set the fees. I would love to say to you, yes, it's modified, we need to reduce the fee. That changes, if we were to reduce the fee, that would drastically change my answers to your prior discussions. Because we collectively bring in close to $250,000 in fees. So that would be a drastic gap we would need to fill.
And then sort of maybe a silly question in regards to money, but it relates to the requirement of wearing masks. Has the MIA said anything about the masks all have to match the uniforms? Because I know they can be kind of strict on their rules. When soccer, they have to all have the same socks. If they're wearing an Under Armour, it has to be a certain color that matches their uniform. So, I mean, are they going to get particular about the color of masks that students are wearing during games?
That's you, Tim. I have no idea.
Great question. There is no language. I think given everything, they just want folks to be safe, and as much as they can be sticklers on color coordinating uniforms with tops, and there is no requirement for color. So good question.
Okay.
The new softer MIAA.
Yeah. And then the next question I have is about spectators. I know there was a discussion last night in Newburyport about spectators, and I don't believe they've made a decision. So I'm just curious to know, for Triton, have we decided, yes, if we move forward with sports, we will have spectators? And then if we can't, is there a way to live stream it with our VTV kids? Just curious about spectators.
So I don't know, Tim, if you want to talk about specifically discussions that the MIA has had, or the Cal.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. As it stands right now, the state guidelines call for a maximum of 50 spectators at an event. Each spectator that comes in would have to wear a mask. They would have to give their name, email address, and phone number for potential contact tracing. So that's an additional responsibility that we will be overseeing. As a league, with everything going on, with all the rule changes, with all the extra responsibility, we agreed for at least the first week or two, we would not have fans at games, just to make it more focused on the kids, make sure that their safety is ultimately first and foremost, and then we'd reconsider having fans later in the school year. With the exception of, we would like to have senior ceremonies earlier in the school year. And with those unique circumstances, we would allow for seniors and their families to attend the pregame ceremony in a socially distant manner, because we really appreciate, and respect those types of opportunities. So we wouldn't want those to go away. In terms of live streaming, I did look into the program. Unfortunately, the main drawback was a press box that was needed, because everything needs to be hardwired, different computers involved. I took photographs and measurements. I believe it's 75 feet from the middle school building to the edge of the track. I was hoping maybe we could hook up to the side of the middle school and stream that way. The way the system works is it's a motion detected system. A lot of hockey rinks have it. It's called Live Barn. If you're ever going to a hockey rink, you can see it. And it detects the motion of the skaters, and it goes back and forth on the camera. So even, it's just too far away. Our middle school, the Edge classroom, is not centered properly either. It's at the 40-yard line, not the 50-yard line. So they couldn't guarantee that it would work. And, that's an additional cost for installation, and the cameras, it's probably around $3,000, give or take. And just without a guarantee that it would actually work, we wouldn't be a candidate for that system. However, we would be allowed to have one videographer designated for the team for the whole season. And that person, most likely a parent, would be able to video, kind of how they've always done it in the bleachers. And then, I'm sure there's a way it could get uploaded to YouTube or shared with the team. So, that has been approved by the league to have that one parent person to work as the videographer. So.
Okay.
And we've actually, just to piggyback on that, the town of Newbury, you remember at their June town meeting, appropriated $90,000 for cable access. So Bob Lathrop has been working on setting up the studio in the outbuilding, which is full rigging, light rigging, like an actual studio, teleprompters, everything. And then the second big chunk of money is actually wiring out to the stadium so that they can broadcast live. So I believe he can stream live, but it has to go over Wi-Fi right now. But he'll actually have fiber optics out there. So that might even allow something like Huddle or something like that, where we could have the access. Again, we're talking about, the total cost of that is so far is $55,000. So that's all coming through cable money from the town of Newbury. But it would not be quick. I don't think that would be in place. So just, the restrictions that Tim mentioned, the second document that's, it's titled Supplemental Guidance for Student Groups and School Events. So it's not mentioned, or it's not specifically targeted for sports. It's kind of everything else, but it does on page 3 list the gathering restrictions. So it's indoor, it's 8 people per 1,000 square feet, no more than 25. And then outdoor gatherings is 25% of the capacity permitted. So that facility is, 15,000 seat bleacher system in the stadium, but it's the 25% or the 50 person. So that's the cap on any event regardless of whether that's athletics or if that was any other type of event where we're bringing in spectators.
Okay. And then Tim, I heard through the Newburyport School Committee discussion last night, there was a mention of the game schedule for the fall season, and that they would be playing games on the weekend. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the game schedule, because that would actually be a really big change for a lot of high school students. They're used to playing their games during the week. I think cross country does meet on the weekends, but most teams tend to play their games midweek. So is that, do you know much about the schedule or potential schedule for fall?
Yes, it is definitely a work in progress. The main focus of the schedule primarily was we wanted to keep schools in clusters. So we're playing, say we're playing Ipswich. So in case there is something that happens, we're eliminating the distance between everyone. We're not overlapping. So we will be playing in clusters. We also wanted to be mindful of days in between games. We built out the schedule to be games pretty much every 3 days, no less, just in case someone was asymptomatic within that first 48 hours back. It would cover that. And then other parts that were tricky to manage is the availability of buses. We have a very good, in my opinion, good fleet of buses. But there are some schools that are in desperate need of buses and can't get them. So with schools adding, extra buses to accommodate the teams appropriately, some teams just couldn't actually play on certain days with their local bus company. So on a draft, it could change, but as it stands now, field hockey was on Tuesdays and Fridays, and soccer was on Wednesday and Saturdays. Cross country and golf were more depending on the availability of the outside venues that we'd be using. So there's a little flexibility to that. So certainly a lot to be ironed out, but we would have everything kind of cleared away. So if a student had other commitments on the weekends, whether it's work or family time or academic time, they'd be able to schedule accordingly. So.
Okay. All right, well, I have one last question. I'm sorry, I just feel like I get, one question answered and it develops 20 more. So, and then there's still so much that's being ironed out. So, but my last question, it has to do with if we were to move to the floating season and it were starting in February, and it's about the stadium usage. We all know that February in Massachusetts, there could be quite a bit of snow on the ground. So I'm curious to know, is there a concern over the availability of turf fields? And can we even plow our turf field? Like, does that do anything to the warranty of our turf if we start driving plows on it?
So I can
question.
I can speak to the turf question, and then regards to the other logistics, Tim could speak to that. But yes, we can plow our turf.
Okay.
It would not be us plowing our turf. There are specific plows, specific vehicles that are designed to be able to traverse the track and then onto the turf. Basically, it keeps it, the blade from digging into the actual, the fibers and the crumb rubber. But by and large, it leaves a thin layer, and then you've been on the field. It doesn't take much sun to warm those up, and then it melts. In February, it would likely be just as comfortable as it would be probably a whole lot more comfortable than it would be in July, for sure. So the turf would be great, but that would I would say, Tim, you tell me if you disagree, that's got to be the only playable surface in February, as far as I'm concerned. You're certainly not golfing. You're certainly not, you could run, I guess, depending. But I remember playing football in November and the ground hurt. So I can't imagine playing football on real grass in February.
Okay. So turf availability, Tim, is that a concern for February?
Yes, absolutely. We really have the one turf field to work with for all the teams.
Right. And we already know
Certainly
football
isn't great.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
that's all I have for right now. So,
That's it.
thank you for your patience.
No, they're great questions.
They were. We can come back to you too if we need to, Maureen. So I saw Linda and then Kaylee. So Linda, go ahead, and then we'll.
If we're going to possibly have fall sports, what about the extracurriculars? Because you know that that's going to be a huge question.
Is that a Patrick Kelly question?
So looking at the guidance that came out at the end of last week, it kind of outlined some of the additional extracurricular activities. And really, I think the major distinction here, Linda, is that for sports, and certainly the sports that the proposal is around moving forward with, they're happening outside. You know, and that's kind of the major distinction, I think, for the way that those guidelines came out. It really speaks against having any type of indoor theater or band or choral event, certainly. I think we'd have to look at our other clubs and activities and talk about how we're starting them, if we're running them, you know, having them done virtually. So like our environmental club can still meet virtually and still can work on initiatives virtually. But we'd want to restrict having them meet in person. I'm still really concerned about the idea of having a large cohort of students present in the building at the end of the school day when we don't have staffing there to support them and we don't have the ability to really filter students in and out of the building safely as we would during the school day. So I have those as real concerns, but the way the guidance reads, unless the event's happening outside, especially for something like our theater and music programs, they wouldn't be something that we'd be able to move forward with.
Okay, thank you.
Just in regards to the building after school as well, we've been looking at even restricting staff so that they're leaving the buildings early so that we can make sure that our cleaning crews have all the time they need. Literally, they're taking, you know, treating it as they do their normal cleaning and then back themselves out of the building, sanitizing and cleaning, you know, and disinfecting spaces as they go. And they know when they leave for the night and shut that door, it's set, it's disinfected, ready for the next day. So having, you know, specifically the high school is a very busy place long into the evening. That becomes problematic just from a basic maintaining the you know, the cleanliness of the building and the sterilization of the building.
In regards to the transportation, the guidelines are going to be the same for the transportation of sports, meaning the windows are going to be open and all that as well. Hand sanitizer on the bus and.
Yep.
Okay.
So that is general transportation guidance. So it's based on the size of the vehicle, right? So at the full documentation, it's what if it's a 78 passenger, a 77 passenger, a 71 passenger, a 15 passenger. If students are in vehicles, that's what that's the guidance. That is the requirements we have to meet. In the, you know, the same, we keep talking about this document, it's the supplemental, you know, speaks about field trips and you know, basically saying if you don't have to, don't. Right? So if you know, certainly no trips over 3 hours, I believe it says, yeah, more than 3 hours away results in close interaction with additional people within 6 feet outside chaperones. It cannot abide by safety guidelines. It's not permitted. So it's kind of this blend, and we keep saying this, there's a little bit in athletics, there's a little bit in transportation, there's a little bit, they're just kind of all blending, and at least the most recent set of guidelines have at least agreed with one another on the basic tenets of the guidelines, which is nice to see.
Okay, I had some other questions, but Maureen had asked a few of those. So thanks, Maureen.
She's so thorough.
That was it then, Linda? You're all good?
Yes, I'm up. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Kaylee, you're up next.
First off, I was wondering, how much does the athletics department make off of game attendance every year?
So it's, yeah, gate receipts, it's $20,000 to $25,000, and that's factored into the overall athletics budget.
So
it's not like extra money.
It's not going, whether we can or cannot have spectators won't really impact the budget that much.
Yeah, it will. Yeah, because
Okay, it will.
it is supporting the general budget. So it doesn't go off to the side and it's, a pot of money where we can say, ooh, look what we're doing with gate receipts. It supports the budget. So yes, if there aren't the spectators, then yes, that is another deficit we need to make up. Yeah.
Okay. So, but as opposed to the, say, cost of transportation, how does it fall in? It's not as high, correct? Or
so in regard, no. So what we would project, I would say the loss of spectators would likely be, well, probably same ballpark. If we lost 15, 20,000, that might be the same, ballpark we might be talking with added costs for transportation. I think I understand the question.
Okay. Yeah. I feel like we'll have to see how it plays out.
Yeah.
In reality.
Definitely all unknowns at this point.
And then I was also wondering if we have looked at what the cost would be if we had to get Triton masks for athletics. Maureen had brought up the fact that will the MIA and Cal make it so that masks have to fit in with uniforms. So I'm wondering if we've looked at any projected estimates.
I don't know if you want to take that, Tim.
Sure. That's something I could work individually with the teams. A lot of times different teams have team stores where they might want to get sweatshirts or t-shirts or shorts, and masks are one of the top selling things these days. So we could certainly have Viking masks for sale. A lot of the stores are online stores, and then they're shipped directly to students' houses. So even a back to school store for all returning students and incoming freshmen might be a nice idea too, since the physical school store isn't open. So
we've thought of more of selling them as opposed to putting them into the uniform package with that.
Right.
Athletes get.
We could
Okay.
definitely make an option for students, even if they're not on a specific team, to buy a Triton Viking mask, if you will. So they're pretty reasonably priced. Yeah.
I was more wondering how much it would cost the athletics department if we had to provide masks with the uniform.
Yeah, so that would be, we've looked into cloth masks. So we're supplying masks for staff, and we've said, okay, maybe it's cheaper for us to just buy all staff 5 cloth masks. And I know I think I have 700 emails a day from different vendors and distributors selling masks. So I think the key would be, we could get cloth masks for $2.25, $2.50 with screen printed with Vikings and you name it. I would think we would want to make sure that if we're producing masks or providing masks to students, they're going to become theirs, right? It's not something we're going to ask someone else to put on their face at the end of another season. But we'd also want to get decent ones, because I know the masks you all have, it depends on the shape of your nose and how wide your face is, and it's all over the place. So I would imagine, I know there's definitely masks that are very specifically made for athletics, so they stay more tightly and fit more tightly on your face and don't move around. So we can certainly look into that. Yeah.
And then I had a few other questions on that sports related aspect, but I think Maureen and Linda touched on them themselves. But Linda had brought up the extracurriculars, and I know it's been a discussion among students a lot about just an answer as to whether or not, since we're starting remote, if we can start the clubs that can happen online, just because it's such a big part of the community, and no one has heard from any of their clubs since, or some people have, but the majority of clubs haven't heard anything since the day the school shut down. So it's been a large question. And then I know Patrick had touched upon theater and band and everything, and I was wondering if we could possibly look into doing the drive-in styles that a lot of other theater groups in the area have done.
Yeah, so it would be partially dependent on the advisors and what they were looking at going forward with. They'd have to be things that were entirely done outside So in terms of practice, rehearsal, everything would have to take place outside. And in terms of the guidance for classes, it becomes a little bit difficult. So like even thinking about marching band, our guidance for band as a class, students, if they're playing instruments outside, need to be 10 feet apart and facing in the same direction. Same thing with our singing classes. You gotta be 10 feet apart and facing in the same direction, lined up in a straight line, so not even in a semicircle. So for marching band, I see that as being relatively problematic because you are marching usually in a pattern as opposed to staying in a straight line moving forward. So there are things about the guidance that we have out there now that I think make some of those challenging to run in that fashion. I know talking to Ms. Reardon, she talked about the potential for some type of readers theater program, but was even cautious about wanting to look into that too much before we figured out where we were going with the remote and the remote learning, and not wanting to add on something that we weren't sure we were going to be able to realistically do. The guidance that came out would make it challenging.
I just heard from the community a lot of concerns with the guidance and the way that the committee has been leading, that a lot of people are worried during this current sports decision that we're going to turn into a school that values athletics more than the arts, and it's just a concern that is out there. So I just wanted to put that forward. Thank you.
I would say that we want to support all of our student programming. The big difference is in how the guidance is written for the various extracurricular activities and what they're saying is permitted and what they're saying isn't. If we can find creative ways to do those things outside and follow the guidance and be safe, I think it's something that we can look at. But again, I'm always going to be concerned with how many students we've got on our campus and at our building at the end of the school day, and what our staffing looks like to support that. And I don't see that changing during the course of the pandemic as a concern that I'm going to have.
All set, Kaylee? Thank you. Linda?
Has there been any thought to possibly putting up a tent and having anything for the
And Linda's frozen. I think we can come back to her in a minute. Hopefully she'll unfreeze. Is there anyone else on the committee that had, Erin, go ahead.
So I think actually Linda and I were thinking about the same thing. So just going back to something that Kaylee had brought up before on a previous call a few weeks ago, and then hearing Linda say it again, has there been thought to put up a tent outside so that some of these other groups would also have the opportunity to use outdoor space to be able to either have a meeting or a gathering, or do something artistic, so that there could be a small music group outside that's working together on something, or that the theater group could do some sort of activity together and still have an opportunity to meet, that sort of thing.
I would love to have a tent outside. I'm not sure the cost of having a large tent and the availability of the tents is something that is going to be feasible. If Kyle would give the go-ahead on releasing the funds for that, I would probably find uses for it all day, every day. I think it would work really well. One of the other things that I have heard with it from places that have been considering that is that the second you put down the sidewalls, you no longer are following the outdoor standards. You're now an indoor space, so the sidewalls on those have to remain up the entire time if you're using it as an outdoor space. I would love a large outdoor tent, and and if we have funding for it, I want to get it as soon as possible.
We can
Not
look
to
into
put
that.
Kyle on the spot, but it looks
Yeah,
like he's about to
no,
jump
and
in.
I'd say certainly Patrick's correct when he said the availability, because a lot of districts are thinking about these types of things, and availability of certain products is challenging. But we can price it out and make sure, confirm our understanding, or absolutely acquire that information.
It sounds like it's a revisit. Aaron?
So I do have additional questions, but did you
Yeah.
want to check over to me?
Is Linda unfrozen? Not sure.
I am unfrozen.
All right.
But that was the only question I really had, was the tent. But is that something that could possibly, if parents wanted to donate or anything like that, would that be feasible if people wanted to do that, if it was able to get a tent?
You say donate to purchase or to rent, or is that what you mean?
Any of the above.
We're always very happy to take donations.
I love donations.
I was going to say,
absolutely.
you're speaking Kyle's language. But yeah, so we can do a little work, and then when we meet next week, we'll be able to come back to you and get a sense of what the feasibility is. You know, a 10 by 30 tent is actually not that big. You know, we have those for preschool and stuff. So it's not, it's to have something viable, to be able to maintain the distance and still run those activities, they need to be the large tents, which is, they're very hard to come by right now. But yeah, we can do a little work and come back next Thursday with some intel on that.
Never know. Maybe a parent may have one.
Maybe they have, yeah. Yeah, if there are any
Yeah.
parents listening with the huge, like 100 by 200 tents.
But that's all the questions I had.
All right. Thank you. Aaron, back to you. And Kaylee, I'll
Okay.
come over to you next.
So I wanted to ask a few questions just based on the restrictions and the requirements for some of the gameplay pieces. We're working on setting up our mask rule right now, and I did hear you say for soccer, as well as reading it, that if you're more than 10 feet apart, you're allowed to take your mask off, that sort of thing. But then you have to remember to put it back on while you're running by somebody and you're getting less than 10 feet. We're talking about putting a rule in place where you're required to wear a mask as soon as you enter campus. And I would just wanted to get your thoughts on how that would conflict, and what the thoughts are if there was a rule on campus that everyone had to wear a mask 100% of the time.
I think the reason for the mask breaks, if you will, is due to the strenuous exercise that's involved in some of those sports. I think students will learn the rules very quick, because yellow cards will be given by the officials, which is basically like a technical foul and change of possession. So that's written right in the rules. If someone forgets, it's a yellow card. So I think, you know, certainly maybe that first game someone will forget, but you're going to learn to follow the rules pretty quickly.
And then the other questions that I have to do with the hand washing and hand sanitizer, and it's going to probably be a little crossover between Tim and Kyle about making sure that the stuff is available outside, making sure that we have enough supplies to be able to cover what happens if a student forgets their mask when they're going to gameplay, and then how we're going to designate somebody to clean the balls at the soccer field, or whatever other equipment is required to be cleaned in that mask break time frame. If it's somebody that we need to hire, as well as what kind of sanitation procedure are we going to be using?
I can jump in real quick on the hand sanitizer and masks. I can assure we do have an abundant quantity of both hand sanitizer and masks available. The masks are those the 3-ply blue disposable masks, and then the hand sanitizer is I think it's 70%, but we have a significant quantity of that, so we should be in good shape. And also the supply chain, on a national level for those two products has become more readily available. So the turnaround time on ordering additional quantities is not what it was, not what we were seeing in the springtime and early summer. So I feel confident with that.
Tim, do you want to talk about the?
I was just going to say, who's going to take
Yeah.
the cleaning protocols?
Yep, in terms of game management, it was actually in the rules that there will be hand sanitizer at the scorers table for soccer and field hockey. So those students will be putting that on before they come in. Also, students will be encouraged to bring their own hand sanitizer in their bags for before, after, during the game. In terms of game management, I might need an extra set of hands to help with, keeping track of, who is where everywhere. In terms of, wiping, disinfecting the ball. I am at a lot of events, but sometimes I do get pulled away to go to another event or another circumstance. So I would need, another adult, whether it's a faculty member or another coach to help out with game management. So in terms of disinfecting the balls, that would be on someone representing the athletic department. It wouldn't be put on the students.
That answer your question, Aaron?
Yeah, and then I'm just curious, like, what do we have for sanitation supplies that we would be using on the equipment?
Kyle,
yeah, so we have a variety of supplies on hand now. Certainly, Tim and I could chat about what some would be most appropriate for certain game equipment, but we do have sanitizing solution in spray bottles, that type of thing. We have sanitizing wipes. We have electrostatic sprayers, which generate a mist. In an outdoor application, that might be a little bit more challenging. I don't know if we might want to stay away from that, but there are a number. Those are just a few offhand.
I think sanitizing wipes are going to be the easiest, just because it's self-contained. It's like the big old baby wipe bottles, and it's just 180 per bottle, and good to go, ready there. It's got everything right in them. You can wipe, throw it away, and we're good to go. Yeah.
Especially in, like you said, in an outdoor setting. We were chatting actually earlier today about these supplies and the spray bottles in an outdoor setting. And if it's a windy day, that'd be challenging. So I do like that idea of the wipes, which we have a lot of. We're good on that.
We're heavily supplied right now.
It's been kind of my bread and butter the last couple months, so I'm feeling.
Kyle's feeling good. We're all stocked now. We're wondering. We're all stocked.
A lot of droplets of sweat over that one early on, but we're good now.
Aaron, did that answer?
Yeah, thank
you. Yeah, good. All right, thank you. Kaylee, did you still have a question? I don't know if that got answered.
So I'm going to jump back to the tent conversation real quick. I was under the impression that Kim Credo in the reopening committee and everything, they had talked about getting a tent for each school. I'm assuming that idea had been just forgotten. And
not forgotten. They're just,
well, not forgotten, but just realized it wouldn't have worked.
It's the cost. So we came up to the, what's needed is one of these large venue tents. So if we want to buy one, but to buy one of those for each school, I don't think I had any clue if you had told me the cost of those tents. So then it's about rentals, and then that quickly snowballed, and now that you can't find them. So yeah, it certainly wasn't forgotten. It's just a matter of the availability. Yeah.
And then on the issue of designating someone to disinfect shared equipment during games, I was wondering if it would be a thing that we could look into, or something that would even be technically okay with all the guidance and different laws and things that we have to abide by, if we could appoint a former water girl or water boy or water person to then become our new disinfector.
Yeah, take that one, Tim.
Good question. With all the guidance, as I mentioned, extending the bench areas to go the whole sidelines to keep everyone socially distant. They are actually mandating a maximum of 3 personnel on the sidelines. So you're looking at a coach, athletic trainer, and maybe a volunteer coach. So unfortunately, team managers probably won't be allowed unless the team had, less than the minimum amount that we're able to have. We won't be giving out water as well. Students will be bringing their own water bottles, and that is a state mandated recommendation from the guidelines. So, and the dirty job of disinfecting, that can fall on me. I don't mind, and I wouldn't want a student to have to do that. So.
Thank you. Was that it, Kaylee? You good? No, more?
Trying to find, no, it was just, that was more along the lines of trying to find something that would let those students still be involved in the activity, but.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? So I have a few. So I guess this goes back to the very beginning, Tim. Can you just talk a little bit? There is a huge discrepancy between some of those sports documents. Can you talk about, do you know what guidance Maya gave to those individual sports committees? Because it seems like the top is like a boilerplate, right? And then field hockey obviously has 5 points, I think, and soccer has pages. Can you just talk about the guidance that they were given? Because I'm curious about why there's such a difference between those sports.
Good question. Yes, the top page or pages were kind of boiler pages that apply to all fall sports in terms of pregame and game management. Then when it said sports specific, it really depends on the type of sport and how they can explain it. So there was a lot of verbiage on golf, just on terms of how they can properly score in a safe manner. So that kind of took up a lot of text. Cross country, same thing. Those are the 2 low risk sports. The moderate risk sports, field hockey and soccer. Boys and girls soccer is traditionally more of a physical game than field hockey. So those modifications, looked into that to make sure that it was eliminated or lowered the risk in those sports. So, I wasn't surprised to see more modifications in soccer as opposed to field hockey, just given the nature of the sport. The committees themselves are represented by athletic directors, principals, coaches, officials, MIA personnel from all across the state, and also the sports medicine committee. Same thing. There's superintendents, there's principals, athletic directors, trainers, doctors, and they also reviewed the modifications as well. So.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that we've wrestled with in putting together the mask policy that I think Erin mentioned earlier was this idea of students who cannot wear masks. Can you talk about what would happen if we had a student that was playing a sport who was had a medical exemption from wearing a mask?
Yep, there is masks can be eliminated for students that supply appropriate documentation of a medical issue. So they would be waived in that regard to make it accessible for them to play.
Okay, so in the policy, we have put in language that allows the building principal in most cases to put additional safeguards in place because as the science has shown around masks, it's not so much about protecting yourself in wearing one, it's more about protecting other people. Are there additional safeguards that could be in place to protect other members of both the person with the exemptions team and the opposing team that you know of?
I'll jump in. I don't think there's any way, right? I mean, I think the difference is when we were talking through that policy, there's things we can do where the child sits, dividers, separate, a little more distance. I think of all the things, and then, and then the danger is infringing on someone's individual right. So if they have a medically documented reason to not be able to wear a mask, we can't put a child in a different room to keep them safe, right? So it's those limited things. We can't put dividers around an athlete. You can't tell them to be a little more distant because they can't play the game. So I think there's quite literally nothing that we can do without changing their equitable access to the game.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Can you talk about, so one of the things that I noticed that golf talks about that the other sports don't as much is facilities. Obviously, I'm assuming there's going to be some need for facilities during field hockey, during soccer, during potentially, I guess, during cross country. Is that being handled on a school by school basis or a venue by venue basis, or how will that be handled in those other sports?
Yes, it's a local decision throughout the league. We strive to have bathroom facilities open at our facilities for students and both the visiting teams and the home teams to use. We wouldn't feel comfortable not offering that. In terms of locker rooms, we would be asking that students come prepared for practice and games, dressed appropriately, so they wouldn't have to enter the building. And I feel we can accomplish that similar to the youth sports model.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Narissa, before we
Yeah.
move away from that, Tim, in the event that we go back to hybrid, how are you gonna make sure that that happens? Are the kids gonna come to school in their uniform and sit in school all day in the uniform?
That would be a discussion we'd have. Right now, you're able to use 50% of your locker room space. So if we did come back to hybrid, certainly I wouldn't want to make students wear their uniforms all day. So I'd work with the school administration and have supervision outside the locker room to make sure that we're not going over that 50% capacity. But I think it would be a quicker transition for students to go in, come out, and head on out. So.
Does that answer your question, Erin? Yeah. Okay. I want to come back to something we visited earlier. We've had lots of conversations with our local health departments about how contacts are defined. So if there's a positive case, you have to define all those who've had close contact. And we had visited with them early on about their concerns about DESE's recommendation of, or I should say, their minimum of a 3-foot distancing in classrooms, as opposed to the 6-foot distancing that Mass DPH and the CDC were using in other things. We actually changed that for the overall school. The kind of standard definition of a contact is, within 6 feet of an individual for 15 to 20 minutes would be defining a contact. At the elementary school level, it was originally set to be an entire classroom because there are obviously circumstances that a standard 6 foot for 15 to 20 minutes doesn't take into account. I think it's unlikely that that a student would be within 6 feet of a student from another team, from an opposing team, or an athlete, I should say, from an opposing team for 15 minutes at a time. But obviously this is kind of an extenuating circumstance, since even though they're wearing masks, there's obviously some really heavy respiration going on here. Has there been any discussion at any level, even at the league level, about whether there could be a common definition of a contact as it pertains to sports, given that it's an exceptional circumstance?
Good question. There's not a uniform way. Each district operates differently. What we would do is we would follow our school building rules and work with our nursing partners in that regard, and the Board of Health as well, and do contact tracing from there. So, each nursing system at each high school has kind of different variations that they'd like to impose. So we did talk about it, just given, there's 11 other districts involved, agreeing on a certain set of rules, just wasn't feasible at this point. But working with our school building principal and our nurses and our Board of Health would make sure that it was as safe as possible.
Okay. So I guess maybe this is a Brian question. Can we do that locally? Because I'm curious what our definition will be if it's not the standard 6 feet for 15 minutes.
So I think
we can.
Go ahead.
I'm asking, can we consult with our Board of Health our boards of health if we haven't already, and come up with where they're at on a comfort level, I guess, of defining a close contact for a sporting event. Particularly, I think, obviously it's going to be different between something like cross country and something like field hockey or soccer.
Yeah, we can absolutely check with them. I think, being outside changes things. And one of the major reasons I know that volleyball, everyone quickly jumped to pushing to the floating season, was just because it's indoors, right? So we know indoors changes everything. So while yes, we know they're going to be in close contact and they're going to have increased respiration, which is going to increase propensity, they're outside, which decreases risk. So yeah, I can certainly check with them.
Okay.
And I've been in lots of contact with them lately. So they've reviewed our metrics, and I guess I would just go on the record saying I would say this is one of the things I start to feel really energetic and we're good about sports and this, that, and the other. And then this is the one that gives me pause, given that each town, each city deals with this their own way, right? So this is something that the state has said, this is your local Board of Health. And we have a great working relationship with we're lucky to have 3 boards of health. And the whole effort with contact tracing, and they're working with us, and they're approachable and they respond. That's not the case everywhere, and so I feel good about where we're going in regards to our relationship and the efforts that are underway, and that I feel like every day we're in a better place. I don't know that that's the case across the Cal, which then when we're mixing athletes on the field of play, that's where I start to have some considerable concerns. So, but I will certainly reach out to the health agents and ask them if they have any. I guess they're going to want to check with DPH, but we'll certainly, as we know, it depends on a private health club. Their distancing is different than PE in sports at a high school. Don't know why, but so they'll want to do some digging. But I will absolutely check into that. Yep.
Okay, thank you. And I guess my secondary question to that is, if there is a different definition of close contacts, can we go back to the other Cal schools? I guess, can there be some way to identify that? Because my concern is that, let's say that that there's another school that says the opposing team shall not ever be considered a close contact because you're never going to be within 6 feet of those players for 15 minutes at a time. So we're just never going to consider opposing team as a close contact. And then if our Board of Health says something different, are we going to be able to learn from another team or another school if there's a positive on that team? Would that notification still happen, I guess? Because they wouldn't necessarily, I guess the question is what happens if one school is more conservative about their definition of a close contact, or one Board of Health is more conservative about their definition of a close contact than other boards? And if you're in a less conservative town, I guess, which we've been good about having all 3 of ours kind of on the same level, can you still get the notification, or would you still notify another team of that positive, so that they could potentially run their local process? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand the question. Yeah, no, I think the issue becomes, with any contact tracing, it's up to the individuals who are being traced to be an active participant in that process, right? So our health agents and the public health nurses can only do so much. It's completely reliant on people responding to their calls and their inquiries. So I can ask the agents that as well, but my guess is if a health agent in a particular town makes a determination that, I don't know what you call it, a dead end, right? Stale trail, where nothing else further from here, we're good, and we don't ever get notified, I don't think there's anything we could do to require that we get notified.
Mhm.
Because that entire process is in all of the authority is within the health agent and department in each town.
Okay.
So certainly the ADs, right? ADs, principals talk all the time. And I would certainly be sure that the AD would reach out to Tim and say, hey, by the way, you know what? We don't know the details yet, but there was a positive. Don't know the kiddo, don't know the team. But so I'm sure we would find out.
Okay.
But I don't believe we can count on, or there's no way to require health agents to report that information.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Going through my notes, sorry. A lot of these have gotten answered. Tim, can you just talk about, in your personal estimation, having had a lot of experience with these sports, which I haven't personally had experience with all of them, how effective you think these modifications will be at maintaining social distancing and reducing contact?
I think, personally, I played soccer in high school. That was my primary sport. So, the game under these modifications has changed quite a bit, but it's to make it safer and to reduce risk. So, I think the way the committee looked at it and, used data and thought about it, I think it did make it safe. It's, it's going to be a different game, but I think it's, still the great aspects of soccer are still there. It's just kind of eliminating the chances of students coming together, eliminating those opportunities where there's groups of kids in an offensive zone. So, I feel very comfortable with it. Personally, my boys are playing soccer this fall, so I think it's, in my opinion, I think it's safe and I'm comfortable with it.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, not my last question, my second to last question, is can you just talk through the schedule timing a little bit? I actually don't think I've seen it in any of the documents. I think this was new hearing it tonight, that you had talked about a first competition day being 10 days after the 18th or something like that?
So, yes, exactly.
Okay.
The MIA hasn't exactly released the first day, but historically it's usually 10 days after that first practice day, which would be around September 28th. So that would be the first day you could have competitive games.
Okay.
With a sport like golf, we're going to have to really get in matches, in a safe manner before daylight starts to happen and be creative with our schedule. But typically we have a rough draft that the league has been working on that, like I referenced, field hockey would be on Tuesdays and Fridays, and boys and girls soccer would be at opposite venues on Wednesday and Saturday. Cross country, depending on availability of facilities, and golf, we're kind of piecing those together too. But we did make a concerted effort to cluster schools to keep everyone safe.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And my last question is, I guess, what is still happening in the Cal? Are there still conversations going on? Kind of where is that process right now? Because I know we're going to fit in at some point. I don't know if that's imminent, if that's, down the road. I think I had heard something about, I don't know, another meeting next week. Can you just give me an idea of kind of timeline of where we're at?
The ADs are constantly meeting. We'll be meeting next week, but just this morning we had a joint meeting between Cal ADs and Cal principals. And, we agreed on different procedures and logistics as a league. We did talk about the probability of our districts allowing sports, and, it seemed like every district was optimistic in planning to have all the fall sports that we outlined. So, there's quite a few school committee meetings make those final determinations across the league in the next week. But, you know, right now it seems everyone is optimistic about having fall sports.
Okay, thank you. So I guess that leaves it open, because it sounds like, is there a significant additional information coming other than votes from other committees? Or do you feel like we've gotten past the bulk of all the information that we're going to be receiving, and we're at the point of the committee here taking a vote? Because this is, you know, we've been kind of waiting on the Cal discussions to happen, and just sort of getting updates on those up until up until right now.
Brian?
I was muted, sorry.
Ah.
I don't expect, unless you, Tim or Patrick, know of anything further, I don't know of any new information. I certainly think that there are things that could change. You know, you changed next week's meeting to Thursday. There are things that could change. Hamilton Wenham, we know, voted one night, next day shifted to remote. They now officially have to vote to participate. They might take a quick vote, who knows? But I don't know that there would be any new formal information, certainly not coming out of any state agencies from what I know. And I know, Tim, you're spending at least half of your life with other ADs in the Cal at this moment in time. But, you know, so I certainly think there'd be more communication, more continued planning. I know, Tim, you were sharing with me all the kind of logistical planning of what this looks like. So, you know, more logistics, but I don't believe any forthcoming additional guidance from MSAA or MIAA or any other state agency.
Okay, so
That
I guess
is correct. We're not waiting on coming down from the state. We're not waiting on any other documentation.
Okay. I'd like to go through and just take a quick poll of the committee then, and just get a, you know, we feel like we're, you know, or one side we feel like we're ready to take a vote tonight. Other side, we'd like to wait and I move the vote off to next Thursday and take it then. So I'm just going to go down the list, and if you can give me your preference, Aaron. You're muted. There you go.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I feel strongly either way, whether to take it now or if we should wait and see if anything else does come out, Narissa. I mean, we still have time if we vote next week, is my only thought, for everybody to be prepared to start on time. So I'm almost leaning that direction.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Paul Goldner?
It doesn't matter. We can vote tonight. We can vote next week.
Okay. Maureen? Sorry.
My preference would be to hold off until next week. I feel like, you know, there are more meetings, and it was in the paper today there was an article about it, I think it was today. Anyways, and it just listed all the upcoming committee meetings. So I don't know. My preference is to wait till next week.
Okay. Caitlin?
I would say next week.
Next week. Paulise?
Next week.
Next week. Linda?
Next week.
Okay. Paul Mayette?
I'll go with the group. That sounds good.
Okay. And Tina, any strong preference?
I'm neutral either way.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like we'll come back to this. I'll make sure that this is one of the things why I didn't want to post an agenda today for next week's meeting if we were going to hold it on Wednesday. So what we'll do then is we will make sure that is specifically called for a vote. I personally feel more comfortable with that as well, because I know people are interested in the vote, and I would like to, you know, in the interest of transparency, literally have an agenda that says we're going to be taking a vote on this tonight, because I think that's, you know, that's a fair thing to do as well for the public, who's obviously has a vested interest in this. So let's go ahead and do that then. Just making myself a note for the next agenda. All right, thank you. And thank you, Tim, I don't think you have anything else on this agenda. So I appreciate your time tonight. And if you want to drop off, you're more than welcome to. And then you can go, hopefully beat those boys at Xbox. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Evan.
Patrick, I'm assuming, I don't know if there's any additional follow-up on the other activities and events guidance that has been briefly gone over. Do we need to?
I don't think there's anything else at this point. If people want a presentation on other events for next week's meeting, I certainly can have something put together for you. But I would say the guidance that's there is relatively restrictive around some of it, and then it's just planning how we try to still accommodate some of the clubs and activities that we have remotely.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee on that piece of guidance? So personally, one of the things that I'd be interested in, Patrick, if we could, is kind of going through and talking to the advisors and seeing, or just polling the advisors, seeing where there's interest to, hold clubs or activities or whatever it might have been that would traditionally be held in the fall of a school year, and kind of identify where issues, is it something that could go totally virtual, which is clearly the preference in the guidance, right? Or are there issues that could be identified that would require them to do some in-person or some variation on that?
So I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. So identify any issues, go through the guidance to determine what could go totally virtual and what might need some in-person meeting to be successful.
Exactly, yeah. So I think there's some things that are probably a no-brainer. Student council is probably something that can fairly easy, right? You move it online, something like that. But I'm sure there are groups, and some that we don't hear from as a school committee very frequently, that there may be a struggle with that virtual setting. And
it's like our club is more difficult to run virtually than it is in person.
Yeah. So if we could have that, that'd be great. Anything else on the other guidance? Can we close that agenda item, Brian?
I don't think there's anything else. I think we talked about kind of the highlights, and especially as they relate to sports.
Okay. And
thank you, Patrick.
Yes, I was going to say thank you for coming, Patrick. I don't know if you want to drop off. We have conversations going on later on policy and stuff like that for things like masks that you're welcome to hang around for if you want to. But yeah. Go have an evening.
Thank you for the offer, but I'm
anytime. Thank you, Patrick. Have a good night. All right, moving on to the USDA meals waiver.
Yeah, so this is just a brief update, and you're going to see more coming out soon. So in the spring, we had a waiver that allowed us in Salisbury to deliver and create meals for all students free of charge. That waiver was then expanded into the summer for all students, and that waiver was just extended through December 31st of 2020. So as of school reopening, we will be providing free meals for anyone who wants one. No pre-qualification, no names, no check boxes, just if you want school meals, we will be providing them for you. So certainly while we're fully remote, it will all be curbside pickup and bus delivery. And then when we shift to hybrid, things get a little more challenging. Of course, Lucinda has a plan, but it gets a little more challenging because we're feeding students who are in the building as well as students who are learning remotely. So the plan, again, more logistics and more information shared with you soon, but the plan is to actually produce all the meals on Monday for the entire week. So a 5-day week, those meals, 5 breakfasts, 5 lunches would be delivered at the beginning of the week while we're fully remote. When we're in school for 2 days a week, we'd be delivering 3 meals to families. And then those students, when they're in school, will be able to have their lunches and their breakfasts here in the school building. So huge. It's not. It just kind of quietly just happened. But I know there were a lot of quiet little, oh my gosh, that's amazing. So that is a significant fact that waiver was extended through December. So there are many, many families who will be able to take advantage of that. And again, no pre-qualification. So if folks who might not otherwise qualify, and whether they find themselves in hard times or not, will have access to those meals. So still perishable. So it's, we're working through in all the logistics of that delivery, and 5 breakfasts and 5 lunches is not just a little bag. So Lucinda's got her whole system of how that'll get delivered and managed, but more information coming soon, but that is a tremendous development.
That's terrific. Yeah, thank you. Any questions from the committee on that? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the DCC. So we met with the towns on Tuesday. I can't believe that was only 2 nights ago because it feels like a month. So I think it was overall relatively good meeting. They were complimentary of our efforts and what we've been doing for the planning process. We came back to contact tracing, which was the big discussion point 2 meetings ago with them. I think that that it's kind of a mixed bag for them. So one thing that we that seemed to be, it seems to be true, is that the town of Salisbury, I think, has been through, because they share their health agent with, or shared, I should say, up until today, because it was announced today, that they used to share their health agent with Salisbury. Their health agent had actually been through a fairly significant outbreak in Amesbury and had that experience. They have kind of already sort of had a backup contact tracing plan. The other 2 towns, not as much. We identified contacts in each of those towns on the boards of selectmen that will be the follow-up to make sure that reinforcement for contact tracing is put in place for their health departments. And I'm just going to, they're going to be looking for contact tracers. That's one of the big things, is that not necessarily someone on staff. I suspect that they will not be on staff, but this will be a situation where if there are a significant number of close contacts that need to be tracked, which could be the case as schools reopen and in an more in-person model, that they would have people that they could call in. So it would be an on-call basis, and those people would be already set and trained and ready to go and kind of jump into the contact tracing process with the health agent and the public health nurse for that town, and give them some assistance. So I'm just going to read aloud real quick. This is what's going out in the weekly digest this coming week, or toward the end of this week, I should say. So it will say, one of the key factors in our decision to open remotely was access to timely, affordable testing and increased capacity for contact tracing. As we continue to make progress in these areas, we are looking to help support our member towns' health agents build their pool of on-call contact tracers. If you are a nurse or other medical professional and would be willing to contribute on a volunteer on-call basis for contact tracing in the Triton communities, please contact Deb Rogers, health agent for the town of Newbury. There will also be opportunities for paid work for those able to provide a more consistent commitment, which Deb will be able to clarify with you. She has been coordinating with Frank and Jack, the health agents for Rowley and Salisbury, respectively. Deb is the point of contact as the 3 agents work together to build this pool of tracers to ensure we have a timely and adequate response if and when cases emerge once we return to in-person learning. And then it has contact information for Deb Rogers at the Board of Health at townofnewbury.org, or in the office. So that'll go out by email, and the goal will be both on our side and the town side to identify those sources, so that when there is need beyond what the capacity of the town health agents and public health nurses, those resources, those individuals will be in place and ready to step in. So I see Linda has a question.
In that thing to go out, I don't hear you saying that parents or anyone in the community could possibly take those courses to become a contact tracer as well.
So my understanding, I mean, Brian can chime in here, but my understanding is that Deb would prefer healthcare professionals. Is that correct, Brian?
She confirmed they have to be a healthcare professional. That's my understanding, is that if in working through the town health department, she's confirmed that it could be someone who's retired and their license has lapsed, but that to be a contact tracer through the town, they would have to be some level of licensed medical professional.
What happens if the towns aren't able to identify enough contact tracers?
We have a problem, which is which is why we're doing this, to hopefully, find. I think they certainly have all said, there is COVID funding available should the capacity need to be expanded. But as I forget who was saying it at the DCC meeting, they're not adding half-time public health nurses in each of the towns. It's a matter of they need folks on standby and on call as needed. So the hope is to build that pool, whether they be paid or volunteer. But in chatting with Deb, it does need to be a licensed or formerly licensed medical professional. Generally
Does that
nurses,
answer your question,
some
Linda?
level of nurses.
Yeah, I don't like it, but it answers my question.
Fair. So I would just say to committee members, anybody that's watching, if you know someone that falls in that category that might be willing to go through the contact tracing training and be an on-call contact tracer, please send them over to Deb. This is one of the, when we get to the metrics later on in the agenda, this is one of the items that's on there because it's been identified as a gap. It's something that when we were talking to our boards of health, they were very concerned that they don't have the capacity based on their current staffing to be able. It's one thing to be able to handle the one-off situation where someone is working outside the community and contracts COVID and tests positive, and they need to do some relatively small amount of local testing. It's something far different when it could happen in the schools, because that's it's a situation where a much larger number of close contacts would be identified in our communities. So it's a different animal than what they've typically been dealing with. And we need to make sure, and they need to make sure, that they have a comfort level with being able to handle that in the future. So all that said, next meeting is the 17th. Yeah, I need to get out an email on that. We're limited. One of the town's Board of Selectmen didn't meet until the 14th, and they wanted to have some additional discussion on this. So the 17th, which is a Thursday, will be the next meeting with the towns. All right, moving back to the agenda, the subcommittees. So I've talked to those of you who have had some, I guess, key changes as part of these subcommittee proposals that are here. But, we were limited based on who could sit on personnel and negotiations, both for timing and potential ethical conflicts. We were also limited because finance, we typically have some of the business office personnel sit in on those finance meetings, so they needed to be able to happen somewhat earlier in the day. It couldn't be a 5:30 meeting. So my proposal, and again, I talked to kind of the key people who would need to be moving on this, would be to have Caitlin, Paul Mayette, and me on finance, Erin, Paul Goldner, and Linda on policy and advocacy, and Maureen, Paul Lees, and Tina on personnel and negotiations. We will need a vote on that tonight, but I do want to thank Paul Goldner for having served on personnel and negotiations over the summer. He stepped in and filled that seat, from what I've been told, very well during the initial negotiation process. He now has conflicts himself with negotiation, just time-wise. So we really appreciate his time on that. Tina actually said to me, I don't care where you put me. So I appreciate she said that because it made my life a heck of a lot easier because I thought I was going to have to go begging because personnel negotiations is such a big job. So thank you to Tina for stepping in there. And thank you to Paul and Maureen for having stayed on there because that's all big things. So can I get a motion to approve the assignments of committee members to subcommittees for the upcoming 2020-2021 school year as proposed?
So moved.
Thank you,
I'll
Maureen.
Second.
Second was Erin, I think I heard. All right. Any discussion on this? Anyone have concerns? I think I hit kind of the big people who might have concerns or issues with this. All right, perfect. I need a roll call vote, please. Erin?
Yes.
Thank you. Paul Goldner?
Yes, and thank
Maureen?
Yes.
Thank you. Caitlin?
Yes.
Paulise?
Yes.
Linda?
Yes.
Thank you. Paul Mayette?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. So thank you again to you all. And hopefully we can settle into subcommittee assignments for the rest of the year without any additional issues. Moving on to general action items, policy approval on a second reading. So this is annexes 5, 6, and 7. We saw all of these last week. I don't think we need to go back through them because we had some pretty substantial discussion at that point. Can I get a motion to give final approval for the policies as presented, please?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Linda. Can I get a second, please?
I'll second.
Erin, thank you. All right, any discussion on these? Paul Goldner?
you. Yeah. Gosh. On the Title IX change, that change is currently facing a lawsuit from 18 attorneys general, including the attorneys general of Massachusetts. We do, I know, have to pass something very much like this and are constrained by that, but I would like to amend the motion to revisit this policy in 6 months to see how that lawsuit has progressed. Because according to the lawsuit, this substantially limits the, let's see, the words are, narrows protections for students and others by redefining sexual harassment to exclude a broad spectrum of discriminatory conduct. So I'm concerned that this policy is not a benefit to our students or to our staff. And so if we can revisit it and just sort of put that in as part of the motion, I think that would go a long ways towards making sure that we are acting in the best interests of our students.
So we can definitely do that if that's the will of the committee. I personally struggle with setting time limits on things because that means we then have to monitor the time limits. So my preference would be to say, and I should say there's been discussion within the MASC community members and on the listserv about simply not approving a policy because of the lawsuit. And I actually had reached out at one point and the response that I got was that, that it's federal law anyway. So regardless of whether we approved a change to our policy or not, the federal law would still govern the reactions that would be involved in the case of harassment, as you know, as it would happen under Title IX or as it would be governed under Title IX. So I know some are not actually approving this policy right now. My preference would be, since you sit on policy and advocacy now, Paul, officially as of 3 minutes ago, and this is clearly an item of interest for you, would you be open to instead approving it as it stands today? And as soon as you know of a change, if you're going to continue to monitor this as time goes on, bring it back to policy and advocacy, because we can make changes, within 2 meetings. It's a relatively quick quick shift if we need to. I'm just reluctant to, what happens if we say revisit it in 6 months and something happens in 4 months, right? We want to make sure that we're kind of constantly on top of that. And if something doesn't happen in 6 months, then it's, am I setting myself phone reminders to go back and check it monthly after that, or is Linda doing it as policy and advocacy? I struggle with the time limits. I'll just say that. Is that amenable to you to just vote it as is and we can? Okay,
that's fine.
And would you take responsibility as policy and advocacy member for keeping?
I will take responsibility for this.
Perfect. Thank you. We can put one more thing on my plate, but I think the table will just collapse under the weight of where my plate is right now.
I would also say that if there is a change, MASC will have a redraft of this out so quick. I'm sure they already have it redrafted the way they want it, and they're just waiting for the lawsuit to succeed. So,
yes, that is true as well. All right. Any further discussion on this?
Can I say one thing? One thing I've heard a lot, I've heard it from staff, I've heard it from, it was a couple parents that saw the draft, that I know when in the policy subcommittee, we had talked about gator style masks, and we had a lot of discussion about that. We looked at some other kind of neighboring districts, and they are banned there. So there was several people who were concerned that there's a lot of research that shows that they're not as effective, concerns about what else can you store underneath your gator there. So it doesn't mean we change it tonight, but I had shared my concerns when we met, and I think that it's just on the radar that if those turn out to be viable concerns, I'll bring them back to you.
All right, that sounds good. Yeah, and I think the research, at least I've seen, has been very kind of back and forth on that. It seems to, yeah.
I'm more concerned about the storage.
Fair.
Just saying. A high school full of gators, just saying.
It's one reason why I actually had invited Patrick to stay.
Yeah.
So,
I can share his concern. Yeah, definitely.
Fair.
Definitely have concerns.
Well, I think once we're in person, we'll know pretty quickly whether that's something that needs to be changed as part of this mask policy or not.
Very quickly.
Yes. All right. Can I get a roll call vote then? Aaron?
Yes.
Paul Goldner?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Caitlin?
Yes.
Paulise?
Yes.
Linda?
Yes.
Paul Mayette?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. All right.
Can we just pause there for a second? So I think a first just happened. Was Linda killing mosquitoes in the middle of a meeting? It's the first time anyone has ever killed a mosquito in the middle of a school committee. I love just documenting firsts. I'm sorry.
Yes, I am, because somebody left the screen door open.
Oh.
Sorry, Narissa, keep going.
All good. Moving on to the metrics for the reopenings of schools, remote to hybrid. So this is Annex 8. So just to give you a little background on this, I know metrics have kind of been a thing that has come up again and again, identified as a need for kind of going along with this idea of starting in remote with the ideal of moving on to hybrid, and then potentially moving on to a fully in-person model from there. So these metrics, Brian and I started drafting them. We wanted to be careful of open meeting law, of course, but I wanted to float it by a couple of key committee members, because obviously this does involve personnel, it touches on policy. So there were a few other committee members who looked at this in between under a quorum. So thank you all for doing that. So just to give you a quick rundown on this. So it lays out the checkpoints and the decision dates. These are pulled straight from the final plan, so there's no change there. To move to a hybrid model, we have a set of metrics that should be met. They include at least one open testing site other than emergency room available either in our 3 towns or in a town or city bordering our 3 towns that provides no charge testing to both symptomatic and asymptomatic minors and is returning results in an average of no more than 48 hours. I can say the 48 hours has been something that we have gone back and forth on, whether 48 hours, so 48 hours is the safe answer, right? That when you look at all the science that's here and when we talk to our boards of health, we're talking about, you know, this kind of idea of where symptoms develop and whether or not symptoms develop, where the days of highest risk of transmission are occurring. So those days of highest risk of transmission, depending on when someone would develop symptoms, if they were going to be symptomatic, and again, somebody who's asymptomatic can still transmit COVID. Those tend to be somewhere between like day 3 and day 8 of after exposure. So 48 hours is sort of a very safe answer. It's the one that you see where there's high risk areas and they're trying to do this kind of large blanket testing to make sure that they can identify all the cases. They are typically using that 1 to 2 day turnaround option. We don't have a lot of cases here. I think you can make a case either way, so I'm hoping that that's something that the committee will discuss tonight. Another requirement is robust contact tracing and monitoring that will be available locally. Again, that's the discussion that we're having with our towns right now, trying to find some additional resources for them because each of our towns does only have a half-time health agent and a half-time public health nurse, and contacts are traced from their town of residence, and it's a fairly intensive process to go through that tracing. And we and they need to be comfortable that that they have the resources and the capacity to be able to do that contact tracing. We set, this proposes a limit of less than 20 new cases in total identified within the 3 Triton communities. So overall, in the prior 2 weeks, that's approximately 0.1% of the residents in the district. The state changed the guidance a couple, or I should say, clarified the guidance for regional school districts a couple of weeks ago. They said that each regional school district, or in, you know, VOTEX are technically regional school districts as well, should have a key town. It's their town with the highest number of students enrolled in the district. That should be their town that they key off of on the color-coded map that I'm sure we've all seen at this point. I will say personally, as I was weighing in on this document, I have concerns of simply looking at Salisbury, which is our highest level of student enrollment, and effectively ignoring what might be going on in Rowley and Newbury. This document, or this metric, would effectively look at the 3 Triton communities as one whole community. So it's regardless of what town it's happening in, it's looking at it as if all 3 towns were part of one community and making a measurement based off of that. It also sets a limitation on, or a metric on the number of individuals with who have newly tested positive within the school building. So that could be students, that could be staff, it could be, you know, the individuals, administration, anybody who's typically in our district school buildings. So within the 2 weeks prior to their testing date, less than 3 new cases in total must be identified, and cases must be spread across at least 2 households. One of the concerns was with our towns being relatively small and these numbers being relatively small, that you could have, you know, a set number of cases in one household, a fairly significant number of cases in one household that's isolated there, and it's been isolated already. So at least 2 households would mean that there are cases in multiple, you know, family units, if we want to call it that, in the district, and not isolated within one single household. So we know that there's effectively spread there outside the household. And then the COVID risk assessment of district facilities, in particular the HVAC systems, have to be completed, and any identified issues must be resolved. So that's something that that the superintendent has been working on, and Kyle as well, in going through that process. So those are the requirements to go from remote into hybrid, and then to move to a fully in-person model. Everything as far as testing, contact tracing, and the facilities assessment have to be satisfied there. Less than 10 new cases in total have to be identified within the 3 Triton communities in the prior 2 weeks. So similar metric community wise as the one above, except it's a smaller number of new cases. It's approximately 0.05% of the residents in the district. In the schools, no new cases have to be identified in the prior 2 weeks among individuals who have been in the school buildings. And then with a nod to this idea of 3 foot versus 6 foot, and where the comfort level for the boards of health and for the committee was, it indicates that the large global and national health organizations that have set that 6 foot guidance that we've been following would actually have to reduce that, and the school committee would then have to request that the district rerun a feasibility study to determine whether all students could safely return to the classroom full-time with the revised recommendations, and that feasibility would have to prove out that return is possible. The document also notes at multiple points that the reverse process, so to speak, going from a hybrid model back to remote, or fully in person back to hybrid or back to remote, could happen at any point in time. It's not reliant on those decision dates and the implementation dates that are in that grid. So I don't know if anyone else who reviewed it has anything else to add. That's kind of the high level of the document. All right, so seeing none, I would open it to comments. And I like I said, the one I'm hoping we particularly talk about tonight is the 48 to 72 hours. Obviously, there's a medical answer here, but as a school committee, we're weighing risk here on a variety of levels. So, there's a risk that is involved, I think, with all students being remote, one that the state has identified over and over, with things like mental health and identifying students who might be in troubled homes and things like that. And that's not something that our boards of health generally weigh. So in a way, I think that's in part our job as a school committee, is to weigh those non-medical risks, right, against the strict medical advice that might exist out there in the boards of health or in the medical community. Questions, comments, things you don't see in here and wish you saw? Paul Goldner?
I mean, my inclination here is to go with the medical answer. In sort of the decision-making tree about which model we're in, the first criteria is it safe to go into the buildings? In my own internal decision-making tree, the next one is, what's the educational impact of going into the buildings versus not? Because that's our primary role, is we're supposed to provide a solid education. And these are, the medical pieces are, is it physically safe to go back into the building? Are we likely to have outbreaks or not? And if we do have a case, are we going to be able to lock it down rapidly without producing a large outbreak? So I look at this document and I think this is a good set of medical metrics to start with and say, are we at that safe point? I continue, and as I brought up all summer long, continue to believe that, the social emotional benefits that the state claims will be there are possibly illusory, and possibly greatly outweighed by the fact of going into a space that is clearly set up to prevent disease spread. producing anxiety. I know where I teach in Newburyport, there's a group of seniors who have organized to petition the school committee to revisit the hybrid decision and go remote because of their concerns about going into the building. So that sort of swings both directions. And then also, is your instruction going to be good if you're 6 feet away and masked? And this document doesn't and probably shouldn't address those questions. So as a whole, I'm in favor of approving this document sort of as is.
As is.
It looks like we've hit all of the high points of safety that we've discussed all summer long.
Okay, thank you. Kaylee?
This really has nothing to do with the key amount of information. It had to do more with the initial set of checkpoints. So the implementation date and the decision date. Readability wise, for me, it would make more sense if the decision date was before implementation. I don't know if there's a reason behind that or not.
I took that straight from the final plan, so I guess that's a question for the superintendent because he wrote the final plan. You're muted, Brian.
Can't
There you
get
go.
control of my mute button tonight. You're muted. Where's that
You are.
t-shirt? So the thinking behind that was what people want to know is when are we shifting, right? The big question is when can I go hybrid, right? When are we shifting back in? So it was the thought was we'd be shifting on October, and then it went backwards, and then there was another column in the plan that talked about the a professional day that would be in that Friday before for planning. So that was the thinking, that it was what people are going to gravitate towards, and the question that they're looking to answer is when do we get to start, and then backwards design, reverse engineer back to the decision date that we would have to make that decision by.
Okay. My train of thinking just was like yes or no, and then when. So.
Yep. All right, thank you. Mr. Lees, did you have you're unmuted. I didn't know if you had a comment or you're.
Yeah, I just have a question.
Yeah.
On that first cap.
Oh, we just lost your audio.
You're back.
There you
go. How many testing sites do we have in the three communities now?
That take minors currently?
That take minors for free.
So one.
Well, because I mean, I'm concerned about approving something that's is gonna fall apart right on the first issue.
Yep. And that's what Brian's continuing to work with Anna Jake's Hospital to try and find a way to pull testing out of the emergency room, so that it's truly accessible, and to hopefully find a way that we can, I don't want to say bypass the referral process, but hopefully speed up the process to get a referral rather than having to send either someone through Anna Jake's to get a referral first or to send them back to their primary care to get a referral for testing. So that's kind of a work in progress that, I mean, maybe Brian has.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would start by saying I share the same concern, Paul, by setting a bar so high that we know we can't achieve it on October 13th, right? So if that is our first date and everything we're doing from a planning perspective is full steam ahead to be able to make that transition by October 13th as planned. That was the first thing, when Nurse and I were talking, I'm like, that seems like such a high bar. To Paul, where did he go? Paul Goldner's point, the medicine or the medical, all the kind of the design of this makes sense from a medical perspective, but I'm concerned about setting the bar too high right out of the gate. I've had several discussions with Gary Lee from Anna Jake's, who's the director of clinical services, and he's been great, super responsive. I can ask him stupid questions and he doesn't laugh at me. But questions about Quest Laboratories and where samples are coming from and going to. And so at this point, they really don't have any capacity. Everything on their shelf that they have for testing capacity is needed for inpatient and emergency services. So someone coming in for a scheduled surgery or a scheduled procedure, or someone who's coming in through the emergency door, they need to have the testing available, rapid testing, to test those patients as they're coming in. So all of their kind of their supply of testing that they can do on site is for their patients. And so then they do have a partnership with Quest Labs. And so they have that tent outside at the parking lot. And, you know, it's broken down, not broken down with him, but it falls apart here because what they can do is basically help us streamline the process to get the order so that the student can be tested, but it still goes into the queue. So it still goes to Quest out in Marlboro, and it's at this point 3 to 4 day turnaround, which is good compared to, you know, 8 weeks ago when it was 10 days. So it's improving. But in speaking with him, we have not come up with any way other than partnering with, we've talked to, you know, I think it was University talked to Ipswich, who's partnered with Broad Institute. My daughter at college, the college goes directly with the Broad Institute, and you pay big money to have kind of prioritized testing in return. So yeah, so as much as they've been super helpful and responsive, and Gary's so much help, and thank you to him, I don't see really a path forward there in regards to a partnership with Anna Jakes that's going to really solve this problem. So
right, because it's a Quest issue.
It's a lab issue, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So heck of a lot better than it was. I think in talking to our legislators, the next point is to put some pressure on Mass DPH in helping to get that lab turnaround time down. When you look at Quest Labs website, they're actually saying that the average test or the non-urgent tests are a 2-day turnaround. That's clearly not happening up here. So I think there's clearly probably some prioritization going on there in some way, or it could even be, you know, wires crossed. I don't know exactly what the issue is, but Mass DPH needs to, you know, we need them, I guess, to step in and kind of resolve that last bit of it, because it looks like Quest is turning it around fast enough. It's just not here, if that makes sense.
So the fact remains, we don't have a facility right now that complies with this.
No, and that's one of the reasons why we voted remote in the first place, was because we don't have a facility. It was far worse then, right? They were at 10 to 12 days, I want to say it, Anna Jakes.
Why does it have to be no charge?
Well, because that's an impediment to some of our students who may not have insurance or may have Mass Health. And I will say that's the benefit to Anna Jakes, is that they take Mass Health, and if you don't have insurance, there is no charge. So that's why I then rule out Convenient MD and say the only place we have left to send students that actually qualifies under that point in the metric right now is Anna Jakes Hospital.
But you say you can't use that because it's in an emergency room.
It's going through the emergency room right now. The preference would be to move it out into their drive-through. I don't know, whatever you call that.
A tent.
It's a drive-through. It's a tent.
Yep.
In the parking lot, so that you don't have students trekking into an ICU. I mean, we heard that on the high school call. That was a disturbing experience for families that needed to get tested, had a minor that needed to get tested. Does that make sense?
Why do we have to restrict it to these communities? Why can't it be, within so many miles?
Yep. So that, I mean, that's a good point, because there is stop the spread testing in Lawrence, Lynn, and Salem right now. We could definitely extend it beyond that, but then we could potentially have families that have transportation issues that cannot easily access those. I know somebody was telling me the other day that, you know, you're driving to Lawrence and you're waiting a couple of hours in their line, and then you're driving back. And not all of our families, I think, have the resources to be able to do that. And I want to say, I'm answering your questions. This is not necessarily, you know, shooting you down. This is just, I'm just giving you the reason behind it being written the way it's written right now. do you want to propose a change? Do you want me to move on to somebody else and we can come back to you to make a comment at the end?
I think it's silly to vote on metrics that, aren't in place now, or they're so restrictive that we can just forget about the vote on September 30th because we're not going to make it.
I don't think we're there yet, right?
Well,
I mean, I think a lot of these things are doable. That's one of the things that Gary was saying, right? Was that moving it to the tent or whatever drive-through out of the ER didn't seem to be like that big of a deal. Right, Brian? They have the capacity to do that, just not rapid testing out there.
So it doesn't change anything other than, yes, they have testing available. I'm trying to remember the discussion about symptomatic or asymptomatic. I believe it's both. So as long as it's the asymptomatic and symptomatic and free of charge,
yeah,
and collecting Math Health, then yeah, then they would have the capacity to do that. So again, there's no partnership there with Triton and Anna Jakes. It's just they have the capacity, and they're reliant on Quest. So.
And then it also says that testing for people that are both symptomatic and asymptomatic.
So that's a Convenient MD thing, is that if we said Convenient MD or a private organization was our, the location, they typically charge for asymptomatic in most cases, but not for symptomatic.
In Anna Jakes, I don't know that I have confirmed that directly with Gary.
I
Anna
believe
Jakes,
their website says that
both.
either insurance will cover it or it's no charge.
Asymptomatic and symptomatic.
I believe so. I can go back and double check that.
I can go back and double check with Gary too.
Yeah. So by moving things out to the tent, I think the only thing we don't check in that list is the time. In other words.
Narissa, can I ask a question
Yeah.
related to Paul's concern? So this was run by the 3 town health agents. Did they express any concern about this piece right here, the one testing site, other than the emergency room? Were there any concerns expressed from them?
No, they didn't share. Again, I've not heard back from Deb, but either Jack or Frank both felt like it was reasonable. Didn't give us, didn't give me an extensive response, but it felt like it was reasonable.
Okay, I'm gonna move on and we can come back to you, Mr. Lees, if you want to change something, amend something. Kaylee and then Linda.
Probably going to be a very stupid question, but what is our reasoning behind the site other than the emergency room? Is it that we don't want students interacting with other people? Is it
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different concerns there. Part of it was, sending 10 students effectively within a short period of time through the emergency room potentially, and that not necessarily being a good thing all around. But the other piece of it that I had heard from parents as well is that they were concerned because there's typically an emergency room fee on their insurance that's high, that if they were accessing a test through the emergency room, that there could be a potential charge there, and that we can do education to say you're not going to get charged, but education only goes so far. So there was a concern that could be a piece that would stop someone from going to get tested there.
Is that including the outdoor tent system as well, or?
No, my understanding is the tent system is it's like a clinical lab work almost type of deal.
Yeah.
So technically, wouldn't that, by that logic, mean that the tent system outdoors as well as the inside ER be 2 different sites, or?
They're all on site at Anna Jakes, so it's in Anna Jakes parking lot.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So, and yes, that
Okay.
it makes sense, but at the same time, to me, it doesn't under our standards.
Okay. So, I think the way it was intended when I wrote it was Anna Jakes is fine as long as it's not through the emergency room, right? Once you say you need to go to the emergency room to get the test.
So we want one spot that can be Anna Jake's indoor or outdoor as well as another.
Absolutely.
Thank
Oh
you.
no, it doesn't have to be another one, just one, period. It could be the tent, and that could be it. As long as it was meeting all the rest of the criteria.
Yeah, Anna Jake's is an entity. You can be tested through admittance, through emergency department, or if you're just coming for a test, you can go to the tent. So it's not, we don't have any formal relationship. They're not setting this up for us. We're just saying it meets the criteria that we've set right here.
Linda?
There we go. Another bug over here. In regards to this document, I mean, I think we have to come up with some sort of metrics so that when we make a vote or not make a vote on September 30th, we have a guideline to go by. And one of those guidelines is the testing portion of it. And right now we don't have that narrowed down. So I think the only thing that we could possibly do is amend the document and just say that those other testing sites in Lynn or Lawrence is an option if parents want to choose to do that.
So the Lynn and Lawrence information, are you saying removing all the stuff about the locale?
No, I mean, we want something that's local because for quality for the people who aren't going to be able to make that trek to Lawrence or to Lynn. But it might be another option that fits for Paul to be comfortable with this document is if we're adding those other two test sites if people choose to want to go to those sites.
Yeah, I mean, so my understanding is the testing site information is provided at the time when someone is either identified as symptomatic or identified as having had a potential exposure, and they would get a full list of them that are current at that time. And I should say that that's kind of an asterisk on all of this because those stop the spread sites. I think they're all the same date, and I believe that date currently is September 12th that they're in place until, and that could be extended, but that's the current time frame for those.
Right. And I think that part of the thing that Anna Jakes was saying that they couldn't do the rapid tests was some chemical that they don't have access to.
Yeah.
Are we talking to our legislatures about that chemical of trying to make sure that that's available up in this area to speed up the testing?
I have not personally had that conversation. We can. The downside to rapid tests from having talked to the boards of health is that they're only about 70% accurate. Yeah. So if you can get the PCRs, the longer term tests, in a timely manner, that's your better option. Or sometimes what they can do is like strep tests. You take the one test that can be developed in the office, and then there could be a follow-up test, the longer test, right, that gets sent out to a lab. It could be done similarly to that, is my understanding, where because the 70% accuracy, you more often get a false positive on those rapid tests than a false negative, is my understanding from what Deb Rogers had said. So you could do a rapid test. If they're positive, you're telling them to isolate and go through all the protocols anyway, but still sending out a PCR test at that point, the longer and more accurate test, to get a confirmation on the test, the result. Does that make sense? But I just, so we can talk to them about rapid testing. I'm just not sure it's the answer because you still need a PCR test to back it up at some point.
Right. Yeah, because the two most important things we need is the testing and the contact tracing, way before we say, okay, let's go hybrid. Mm-hmm. I mean, those two pieces are going to cause us to chaotically go into remote if we go hybrid. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay.
I was just gonna say on the rapid testing. So in my conversations with Gary, it was they have them on the shelf. Their supply and their resources are allocated towards the hospital operations. So I don't think it's a lack of. I don't think they have a hard time getting tests, or I'm sure they have their own supplies. It's for that general public coming through to get a test. They've partnered with Quest just because of the whole process and resources.
Yeah. Where I have heard the reagent concern is with pediatricians' offices that are trying to bring in those Quidel machines. So it's somebody that's new, trying to bring in that rapid testing into a pediatrician's office or a family health office, and they're having trouble sourcing that reagent. So. Which would be great to have those two. The more testing sites you have, the better it gets, as far as I'm concerned. Kaylee?
I know we had the question as to what Anna Jakes was saying on their website. So I just checked it really quickly. Their last update on their website was on August 3rd. So that's a month ago. Yes. So everything's changed since then. But the website-wise, they say that patients must obtain COVID-19 lab results directly from your ordering physician, just because of HIPAA and other regulatory things. So
yes,
that's all that it says on its website that I can find regarding it.
It may be in the Mass DPH. I mean, I'll see if I can go back and track it down. But I believe I know it says they accept Mass Health, and that if you don't have insurance, that's no charge. And I believe that's both symptomatic and asymptomatic.
I just emailed Gary.
Okay. Thank you.
Gary knows everything.
Gary knows everything. Of course he does. All right. Other comments or questions on this? So coming back to you, Mr. Lees, is there something that you'd like to amend here or suggest amending?
I would take the communities out. I don't think, my fear, obviously I'm in favor of safety, and that's why I push for the remote, but if there are no cases, come the end of September and there's not a lot of outbreaks around us in other school districts, that's what I've said all along. I want to have the ability to go hybrid if that's what the committee believes based on the information then. And as I look at this, if we can't satisfy that first one because of the restrictions in the communities, I don't know, I think it could be a problem.
The problem I have, Paul, is when there is an outbreak, we're not going to have a plan. If we don't have a testing site that's available to us for a number of students or staff that we have to send there, then we're going to be right back to where we are right now. So we need some type of metric that we have a plan in place, because I can't vote to go hybrid if we don't have a plan in place.
I don't know if, can I summarize for you here, Paul? I think maybe Paul's recommendation would be, the stop the spread sites are turning results around that quickly. So maybe his suggestion is to send them to the closest stop the spread site. But I have concerns about that as well. I just think there are families that aren't going to be able to access those easily. We know that we have, families with transportation issues, or a single car that's shared among a number of family members, where it's not a situation where you can take that car and drive to Lawrence and wait in line for a couple of hours, not knowing often the exact time that you'll be there, how long you'll be there, and then drive back. So, because effectively we could say, we meet this today, right? You can go down to Lawrence General. It'll give you a 2-day turnaround. That's what they're quoting right now. You can drive, it's in their parking lot. You can drive through. It's no charge. I'm just concerned about families that don't have the ability to do that. And I fear that there are some of our higher risk families potentially for contracting something, and we need people to get tested. I mean, we can, because right, the other option is they isolate for that time period. But if we don't know if they're positive or negative, we can't contact trace. And by the time you let it go for 14 days, and there'd already potentially been transmission, when that case was identified, the person that you had recommended testing to initially that didn't go get it, whoever that they may have exposed at that point, who may have contracted it, it's already out of generation on that transmission process with no check, because we can't check on an isolation. It has to be on a positive test result. And I will say, this is really hard. We wrestled with this for a long time
Yes.
on how to get this written.
And the problem is you don't know how long these stop the spreads are going to be, and it could be further. You might have to go to the Cape to get the stop the spread. That's at no cost.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest the North Shore on the geography, that's all.
I mean, we can widen it out one more set of towns if we want to do that. What's the will of the rest of the committee, I guess I should ask. Do we want to widen this, or do we want to leave it as it is?
Can we talk about, I was just gonna say, there's two aspects of this. It's the widening the radius, and it's also the 48 versus 72 hours.
Yes.
Right? So that also, if we said 72 hours, again, there's an impact there. There's a medical impact. But I think, to your point, Paul, that changes the rigidity of it in regards to just a potential complete dead standstill.
And you could effectively say, I mean, Anna Jake's is at 3 to 4 days already. So they're mighty close to meeting that. All right, I'm gonna pull the committee so that we can move this conversation along. So I want to do location first. So can you give me a either leave it or a widen it? And if you'd widen it, where to? Erin?
I would support widening it, but I wouldn't go beyond the one extra town radius.
Okay. Paul Goldner?
Leave it.
Okay. Maureen?
I support leaving it because I feel like Anna Jake's is coming along quickly, and hopefully they can be that one site.
Okay. Caitlin?
I would say we can widen it, but I agree with Erin that it would need to stay with just that one extra town.
Okay. Police. All right.
Widen it to include Essex County. My concern about Anna Jake's and relying on Anna Jake's is new reports going hybrid, right? So if there's going to be a problem, it's going to be there. And that's my concern.
Okay. And just because Anna Jake's is satisfying our requirement doesn't mean that everybody couldn't go wherever they wanted to. If they want to go and pay for the test as an asymptomatic person, they can do that. If they want to go drive down to Lawrence, they could do that, right? There's nothing limiting anyone to say you can't go do something else. It's just saying, yep, we can check the box and say that there's local accessible testing that has a timely turnaround. Yeah.
Also important to note, you can't make them go take the test.
Yes, you can't make them go take the test. It's true. It is true. Where am I at? Linda.
I'm in favor of leaving it because I agree with what you say, that we need a local place for people to go, and they can go wherever else they want after.
Okay. Paul Mayette?
I would be in favor of leaving it as well.
Leaving it. Okay. Tina?
I'm in favor of leaving it as well.
Okay. So we've got 5 on the leave side. So we'll take a motion in a minute to leaving it as is. But time, can I go down the list again and just get a 48 versus 72 hours? And I mean, I can repeat any of that information that you want, but basically it's that very strict interpretation of the highest risk in the medical being somewhere between days 3 and day 8, typically after exposure. So if you're getting, turnaround in 2 days, that's very timely. If you're moving it out to 3 days, then you're right at the beginning of that that transmission period. So Erin?
Be in favor of leaving it.
Leaving it, okay. Paul Goldner?
Leave it.
Okay. Maureen?
I vote leave it at 48.
Okay. Caitlin?
Leave it at 48.
Okay. Paulise?
48 hours.
Okay. Linda?
Leave it.
Okay. Paul Mayette?
I would say 48 hours as well.
Okay. And Tina?
Leave it.
Okay. So it sounds like unless you have any other changes that we'd like to make to this document, it would go as is. Are there any other changes that we would like to see made? All right, seeing none. Can I get, hang on, let me find my motion. Can I get a motion to approve the metrics for reopening schools as presented, please?
So moved.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Both Linda and I said it. Yep.
Okay. Who wants to be the motion maker or the seconder? Aaron's in? All right. Okay, and I need a roll call vote on this. Sorry, any discussion? And I need a roll call vote on this. Aaron?
Yes.
Paul Goldner?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Caitlin?
Yes.
Paulise?
No.
Linda?
Yes.
Paul Mayette?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and I'm yes as well. So let's get an 8-1 to no abstentions. And can I get a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of planning for negotiations with union personnel, not to return to open session, please?
Make the
So moved.
motion.
Heard lots of, I think I heard a Linda and then a Paul Mayette. All right. And I need a roll call vote on this as well, please. Aaron?
Yes.
Paul Goldner?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Caitlin?
Yes.
Paulise?
Yes.
Linda?
Yes.
Paul Mayette?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
All right, and I'm a yes as well. So we'll go into executive session, not return to open session. Thank you to those who came out tonight. And I'll just, for the sake of this being on a video recording as well, say again that if you want to contact the school committee, it's schoolcommittee@tritonschools.org. And I will be responding to you as the chair, but the rest of the school committee will see my response to that. We just have to limit it because of mass open meeting law. So thank you for your time tonight, and into executive session we go.